evening and welcome to the 36th Legislative District Virtual Town Hall. Tonight, you will be hearing from State Senator Reuven Carlyle and State Representatives Noel Frame and Liz Berry. Some of you have submitted questions in advance, and I will read those questions to the lawmakers. You may also submit your question live via the comments section, so please submit your question now, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Before we begin answering questions, I'd like to open up the floor to our lawmakers for some brief opening remarks. We'll begin with Senator Carlyle. Senator Carlyle, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, and good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure to spend a few moments and really try to talk about some of the real deal issues that we face as a state. I just want to start out by acknowledging the enormity of the journey that we've all been through with COVID, and just the emotional and the spiritual challenge, particular impact on young people, and the behavioral health and mental health issues that we're all facing in this difficult time. And I just think it's incredibly important. And I also send real recognition to those families who are really struggling with COVID and with health, bad outcomes, or illness or death. It's really a difficult time in our community. I really appreciate the opportunity to get together. I think can appreciate the enormity of the just the deep sense of conviction that our district faces, the issues, the emails we get. We work really hard to be deeply engaged in customer and constituent services. I just want to thank our staff who work so hard on that, and our team really takes that seriously. And I know folks fire off an email about something, but when people run into a problem with it, employment security or something else, we really do our best. It means a lot to us that you reach out, and our team really takes that as an important part of this, our obligation to you. Folks might have seen that I made an announcement this week that I will not be running for re-election. And I just want to take this moment to thank everyone for the fabulous support that I've received and the work that we've done together. I'm very proud of the work that I've done, and a deep sense of fulfillment and accomplishment and completion. And I'm excited to close this chapter and open some new chapters in life. So it's a really fabulous time for me and my family. And I have to say, the old joke is it's hard to be a prophet in your own land. But I will say that when I was in Glasgow at the UN Climate Summit, the recognition of Washington State's leadership on climate was unmatched. It was just unbelievable. And so I really feel great about all we've done. And I just want to welcome everyone again and thank you for everything that we've been able to do together. And I look forward to a fabulous evening. Thank you.
All right, I think it's over to me next. Good evening, everyone. Representative Noel Frame, so excited to be with you tonight. Really, I have to say, of all the things about the virtual session and having these remote options to engage, this is one of the things that we love. In past sessions, would have been really hard for us to come home at night and have a town hall after a 14-hour day in Olympia, but because we're remote, we get to have this engaging conversation with you all. So just thank you for taking time out of your evening. We really appreciate it. As Senator Carlyle said, it's been a really tough couple of years. And I think so much of what we are reflecting on in this session is so much of the last couple of years have frankly been focused on literal survival, economic survival, health survival, and otherwise. And I think we are all reflecting a lot on how in this moment we pivot to the best of our ability and really reflect on the inequities in our economy, the inequities in our health systems, the inequity in our educational systems that have revealed themselves during this pandemic. They were always there, but the pandemic has really ripped that open for all to see. And we are trying to be really thoughtful about not just the policies that we're passing, but the investments we're making, particularly one-time sort of catalytic investments to spur economic activity, to meet the needs of our children, and be really thoughtful about how we move forward. It's been a tough time, but we want to make sure as we go forward, it's equitable and inclusive, particularly on our economy. So I am so excited for this conversation tonight. I'm sure we'll talk about some of our different priority bills, but looking forward to hearing from you all. And I will turn it over to Representative Berry.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you tonight. I'm Liz Berry, your newest state representative, and I'm so lucky to have Reuven and Noel there guiding me along the way as this rookie figures out her path in Olympia. But this is my second session representing you, and I am having a wonderful time standing up for all of our shared values in Olympia. I get to serve as vice chair of the House Labor Committee, where I get to remain focused on protecting working families. I've got a couple great bills there, in particular allowing home healthcare workers to bargain for retirement. We know we need to be attracting and retaining that workforce. I have a bill you might have heard on NPR tonight that was focused with Kim Malcolm on guaranteed basic income program in our state. It's a new and innovative program that we've seen work around the country, and I'm looking forward to starting the conversation here in Washington. As a member of the Environment and Energy Committee, continuing to combat climate change remains a top priority, and partnering with Reuven on that every opportunity I can. I have a bill that will help accelerate the process of eliminating PFAS, or forever chemicals, in our products, after hearing an alarming story this summer about that in Puget Sound families. And another priority will always be for me addressing and combating gun violence in our communities. I have a personal story of gun violence in my past. My former boss, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, was shot by a gun, and one of my friends and colleagues, Gabe, was killed. I've got a bill to ban untraceable homemade ghost guns in Washington, and also a funding request of $15 million to fund the Office of Firearm Safety and Prevention. Thank you so much for everyone tuning in tonight. I look forward to your questions, and let's get started.
Great. Thank you all for those introductions. This is just a reminder to you all that you're attending a live virtual town hall with the 36th Legislative District, and you can submit questions in the comments section. Our first question is, it's year 3 of the pandemic, and so many sectors like entertainment are struggling to reliably remain open and facing steep costs with testing plans. What is being done at the state level to address COVID recovery and support small businesses?
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in and take that one first. And I'm really actually excited about this. You'll see why I was mentioning some of my comments in my opening remarks. I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the House Finance Committee, focused on tax and fiscal policy, but also on the House Appropriations Committee, dealing with our budget, and our Community and Economic Development Committee. So I joke I'm like on all the money committees all the time. This is what I think about a lot. In the role of chair of finance, along with the chair of the Community and Economic Development Committee, we've actually been convening weekly with stakeholders in our small business community, micro enterprises, our community development financial institutions, our Office of Women and Minority Business Enterprises, as well as our agency like the Department of Commerce, and really checking in on how the investments we've made over the last couple of years are working and which ones we may potentially want to expand and pivot. We put in something like $300 million into the Working Washington grants over the last couple of years, in part because of federal dollars. Those Working Washington grants are direct grants to small businesses who are, have really been focused on surviving the pandemic. Last year, we also set up the Flex Fund, small business loans, to again help our businesses who needed access to capital in this moment. Finally, we set up the Small Business Resiliency Network, particularly for our underserved communities, including our entrepreneurs within communities of color and in our really rural kind of Main Street communities. We know that they really need oftentimes to work with trusted messengers, and folks can frankly help them through the different technical aspects of accessing these different programs. We saw with that federal payroll protection program that so many of our entrepreneurs of color were just left out of those programs because they didn't have, for instance, existing relationships with banks. So building on all of that, we are looking at expanding the Working Washington grant program, making additional investments in those flex funds for small business, expanding the Small Business Resiliency Network, and also looking at something that we're looking at calling the sort of Small Business Innovation and Competitiveness Fund, and really making targeted investments so that we can move from surviving to thriving, and really help entrepreneurs think about this in an innovative way. We have a lot of organizations across the state that are doing things like small business incubators, targeted innovation programs for entrepreneurs of color, and really just being thoughtful about how to help that small business community take this moment to really grow. We are seeing, sort of in the wake of the Great Resignation, this unleashed entrepreneurial spirit nationally and here in Washington. We really want to capture that and make this investment in these entrepreneurs to really grow and generate economic activity here in the state moving forward. So those are a lot of that is budget requests. We're also looking at big economic development investments like shovel-ready projects across the state to attract private investment and businesses locating to communities all across Washington, so we share that prosperity. So I will stop there and see if either one of my seatmates wants to add any more.
I think you've got it handled, Rep. Frame. So our next question is for Senator Carlyle. How is the legislature planning to fix the Washington Cares Fund?
So thanks so much for raising that. We received hundreds and hundreds of emails from constituents, and I think it's fair to say that this was an extremely frustrating journey for folks. I want to start, however, by saying that, there's just a very tough reality that so many families face in terms of long-term care. This is just an incredibly serious crisis. So the innovation of the Washington Healthcare Cares Act is, I think, incredibly important. And the idea and the spirit of it is essential. And we have to figure out how to move forward on this policy. At the same time, I think it is important to recognize that the legislature did step back and take a pause. We have a very robust task force of officials who are looking at the data, looking at the finances, looking at the integrity of the program, looking at the fairness and the equity relative to whether someone pays in, whether they're able to get benefits. So the transition of a program like this and the development of a program is challenging. And I don't think the legislature did a great job in that first round. Anytime you're really innovative and you're really on the leading edge of a policy like this, it is important to come back and to listen deeply and to have the humility to make corrections and to stay focused on the policy itself in a thoughtful way, but at the same time be very fair and equitable. So I think this task force, this pause that the legislature is taking, I'm hopeful that the task force will come back with some very specific recommendations that do recognize issues like people who are, I think, 55 and older, who are pay in, who wouldn't be eligible. We had some challenges with veterans and the tax rate itself and the benefit level. So there's a lot of work going on. We're taking it very seriously as a legislature, and there's a lot of really good people who are really dedicated to try to get this balance right while being both innovative and moving forward on a program like this, while at the same time ensuring that it's well designed and fair and equitable. So that effort is underway. It will be postponed, and there is a hold on any withholdings from your payroll. So nothing's coming out right now, and hopefully this can get resolved next year.
Great. Thank you, Senator Carlyle. This is a reminder that you're watching a live virtual town hall with the 36th Legislative District. And you can submit questions in the comments section. Our next question is, how will you address the teacher shortage? It's worse than it's ever been. We're barely hanging on here.
I'm happy to take that one. Teachers have one of the hardest and thankless jobs in the best of times, and I can't imagine what they are all going through right now during COVID. This is actually a really special time for my family. George, who's 5, just started in kindergarten at John Hay Elementary in Queen Anne. Shout out to Ms. Bury, best teacher ever. We need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to address teacher shortages. And we have to get new teachers in the classroom, but also convince our teachers now to stay. One thing we can definitely do to help with that is more funding. We all here, I know, are committed to making sure this year that we're making increased investments in special ed, student and teacher mental health supports, school nurses, equitable learning opportunities, recruitment and retention, and COLAs for our teachers. As Vice Chair of the Labor Committee, I think a lot about workforce and retention, especially in so many areas, not just with teachers, but with nurses, hospital workers, childcare workers. They're being pushed to the brink, and we owe these workers more, better protections at work, better compensation, better flexibility, and it's our job to deliver for them, and we will be focusing on that this session. So thank you for that question. Thank you to all of our educators out there listening tonight.
And thank you, Rep. Barry, for your response. So our next question is, the overall funding strategy in Washington seems to be steal from the poor, give to the rich. This is unfair and unsustainable. What will you do to make the rich and big corporations pay their share, especially in cases where they socialize their expenses by paying their workers so poorly that they need public assistance to survive?
Well, I'll be happy to tackle that one. I think about it a lot. I am really proud to share that there is just tremendous work happening on this front. I will say in real time in the 2022 legislative session, I've joked that my number one job is to fight off bad tax policy so that we can get to the really good tax policy that we are planning for the 2023 session. As many of you know, not only do I chair the House Finance Committee, but I also co-chair a bipartisan, bicameral and beyond work group, the tax structure work group, that has been engaged in work for nearly 4 years now to think about comprehensive structural reform to the tax code. As your question implies, we have the most regressive tax code in the nation, where we ask those with the least to pay the most. And it's not right, it's not fair, and to your point, it's not sustainable. I am really proud to share, even though this work is really thinking ahead to 2023, we had an incredible hearing in the Senate Ways and Means Committee today, of which Senator Carlyle is a member. The companion to my proposal, the Washington State Wealth Tax, was heard, and just under 2,700 people signed in support of the legislation, which would really bring parity to the property tax code by asking those with financial property, more than $1 billion worth of financial property, to pay their fair share. And some of the other proposals that were considered today in that same committee include, looking at perhaps a primary residence property tax exemption for our homeowners in Washington State. I think many of you know that when we passed the fix to McCleary and worked to fund our public schools, we asked, really middle-class property owners and their renters to pay that bill, to foot that bill, and did not ask the wealthiest in our state to pay their fair share. The combination of those bills would go a long way to fixing that. In addition, the work group is looking hopefully to finally replace the B&O tax with, frankly, maybe rational tax policy to support our small businesses who right now operate under a deeply unfair system, which is a business and occupation tax. In addition to hopefully doing things like expanding the working families tax credit, which we passed last year, which are targeted tax credits for our working families as an exemption and refund from the sales tax. So I'm optimistic about change. I really appreciate the question. We can't have this blemish on our record as a progressive economic leader in the nation and the world. We've got to fix it. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Rep. Frame. Our next question is, what are the state's efforts on climate change this year? Senator Carlyle, I think this one might be for you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And, serving as chair of the Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee is just a real fabulous opportunity to step back and look at global best practices. And some of the things that we've learned are incredibly exciting. And the fact that I really want people to appreciate that we are the only state in the nation with binding, enforceable level commitments to Paris Agreement. So I'd like that to really sink in. The only state in the nation with binding, enforceable level commitment to Paris Agreement level emission reductions of net zero. So what does that mean? That means that if last year we emitted about 100 million metric tons, and by 2050, we have to emit 5 million metric tons. So of course, we need a whole suite of policies and all hands on deck. So the central policy that we have is economy-wide carbon pricing and cap and invest program, which will start in January of 23. We have the Clean Fuel Standard, that is a decarbonization plan for our transportation sector. And we have the strongest 100% clean energy bill in the nation to decarbonize our electricity sector. We also have fabulous legislation on eliminating hydrofluorocarbons, which are super pollutants, as well as building efficiency, building standards, and of course, electrification of transportation. So this year, a lot of legislation is basically cleanup around a lot of those bills, a lot of that legislation. We're working on some natural gas bills relative to commercial buildings, a number of pieces of legislation coming out of the House on that front and some out of the Senate. So cleaning up all of those policies and programs to ensure that we're on track for that kind of decarbonization is incredibly important. I'd also note that embedding in the concept of climate in our land use policy is a critical piece of our planning, our strategy, and how we integrate transit and density and smart growth and all of those issues. So there's a lot going on. And ultimately, we're at an important juncture as a state. There's so much traction in the Pacific Coast, aligning with British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California on the clean fuel standard is a big step, as well as our cap and invest program. So a lot of the legislation that you'll see is around buildings this year. I've got a fun little small bill to give individuals up to $200 to purchase an electric or battery powered lawn equipment, and which has gotten a lot of traction. And then there's also a bill to really focus on renewable hydrogen, which is critical to Seattle and Washington State as a hub. There's $2 billion of federal money in being a regional hub for renewable hydrogen, which would power ships and aviation and energy storage. So all of that work is underway. Super excited. Senator Cantwell wrote that legislation, and she put our fingerprints all over it. So we're very excited about the potential of that.
Great, thank you. So this is a reminder that you're watching a live virtual town hall with the 36th Legislative District, and you can submit a question in the comment section. Our next question is, how are you protecting abortion access and reproductive health for all Washingtonians?
Ooh, I would love to take that one. As a former board member of NARAL Pro-Choice Washington, I am passionate about standing up for women's reproductive health. And I know every one of us, all three of us, will fight on this issue in Olympia and beyond. And this question is weighing on so many of our minds right now with what's happening at the U.S. Supreme Court and their efforts to potentially entirely overturn Roe v. Wade. This is a reality we have to face, but we can't give up in the fight. We have to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and get ready for this because millions of women are counting on us. I support a number of legislative efforts this year because we here in Washington need to be ready to take women from other states who are going to have their access deeply, deeply restricted. And we stand ready for that challenge. There are a couple bills I want to highlight. There's a bill in the House to clarify that licensed medical providers and clinicians can legally provide abortion care, which is incredibly important, especially in rural areas. There's another bill to make sure that providers can prescribe immediate postpartum contraception. And there's another bill to increase access to fertility services, which I think is a super important conversation we need to have in this country. 1 in 3 women in America have had an abortion, have had fertility issues, or have had miscarriages, but we don't talk about it enough. And I think we need to bring all of those issues to light and talk about them so that we can get people the access they need. So please know this is going to be a top priority. Also, as co-chair of the House Democratic Moms Caucus, all of these priorities are on our list, and we are advocating with leadership to see action on them this session. So thank you so much for that question.
Thank you for your response, Rep. Berry. Our next question is a live question from Terry. Terry says, last year was historic in overdue policing reforms. This year, we are seeing rollbacks to lower standards for use of force from both R's and D's. Can we please understand how you are working with your colleagues in both chambers to hold strong and continue forward momentum?
I'll just jump in really briefly and say that Representatives Roger Goodman and Representative Jesse Johnson, who have gotten really national attention for the leadership that they have demonstrated on this package of police reforms, in addition to so many members of our legislature, including the Black Legislative Caucus and a member of Color Caucus, have done tremendous work. I have inherent trust in Reps Johnson and Goodman to navigate the nuances of this. It is completely unacceptable to have law enforcement not respond to a behavioral health crisis. And I frankly do not believe there was ambiguity in the law. And we had both the Council of Police and Sheriffs, as well as the Attorney General, provide legal guidance on that they were not prevented from showing up. But it's clear that the perceived lack of clarity is resulting in real harm to our communities and preventing behavioral health crises from being supported in real time in the way that they need to. I have trust in my colleagues that they will find a appropriate, nuanced response that does not backtrack on the incredible progress that we made last year, but ensures that our law enforcement community has the clarity that they feel they need to help our youth in crisis, our adults who are experiencing a behavioral health diagnosis and emergency. And I think that will be good for all of us to get that clarity. So I feel comfortable with working with our colleagues on that.
Great. Thank you, Rep. Frame. Our next question is, what is happening at the state level to solve homelessness?
Well, that's a very important question. And I think we all know that that is front and center to so much of the work underway. Interestingly, I think the King County Regional Homelessness Initiative is at an important stage. There's a lot of momentum behind that. People really want it to be successful. When you look at the data, we ran some numbers, and it's interesting. It's important to put in things in perspective. In this biennium, this 2-year period, there's $1.9 billion flowing in operating budget money and new spending. Now, most of that 1.1 billion is in rental assistance. So a lot of money come from the state in that area. In the area of capital budget, sort of capital construction, we have about about 600 million in capital construction. And a lot of that is in the Housing Trust Fund, which a lot of people have familiarity with as a well-vetted program. And then in terms of some recent legislation that increases funding or expands the use of the state and local funds for affordable housing, that ends up being about $90 million. So I feel like there's a lot of momentum in the partnership with the city and the county and the state. It goes without saying that we, at a deeper systems level, have categorically failed in our behavioral health system. So we're rebuilding after years of disinvestment. And so there's a lot of initiative underway. We put a lot of money into behavioral health the last few years, but of course that was from a very low base. So we were so far behind, but we have put a lot of money into inpatient and some of the pediatrics as well. So a lot of effort underway on that. And I hope also in our addiction and counseling services that we'll be able to make additional progress. So it's been a big year on the funding side, and we're hoping to continue as we move into next year's budget.
Great, thank you. So this is just a reminder that if you have a question, you can submit it in the comment section. Our next question is for Rep. Frame. Thank you for hearing House Bill 1676, the vapor tax reform bill, in your committee during the first week. As a tobacco treatment specialist at Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, this bill is really important to me and the patients I serve in our community. Can you and Rep. Berry help this bill move? We see this as a key public health tool to prevent youth use. And as a note, they add 1 out of 3 cancer deaths is caused by smoking. Long-term health effects of vaping are not yet known.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, and appreciate that you saw that I scheduled it for the very first week of the Finance Committee because I believe strongly in the legislation. I think it is an important tool for us. So, I will just say, as with my own experience and sort of my chosen family and having teenagers around me and watching the truly predatory practices of tobacco companies targeting young people for vaping, the flavors, the marketing, it's unavoidable for young people. And there's no question that the big tobacco companies are trying to set up a whole new generation of tobacco addicts in the form of vaping. In terms of moving it, I will just share, it is a bill that is not, if you check the legislature, we have these different cutoff periods, and this week is policy cutoff, next week is fiscal cutoff. This is a bill that does impact state revenue, and so it's not subject to that cutoff process. So we still have time to move it. And I think the next steps will be to see if we've got the votes in the Finance Committee, of which I am the chair, to be able to move that bill out. I am one person with my vote, but I'm talking to the rest of my colleagues about the importance of moving that bill out of the committee. So ways that you all can help too are not only messaging us, but asking your friends and colleagues that are represented by other members of the Finance Committee across the state to encourage their representatives to support this legislation, which I will note is actually prime sponsored by Republican Paul Harris of Vancouver, which is a really, I think, an important message and priority of this bipartisan legislation. So thanks so much for the question.
Great. Thank you for your response. All right, so our next question is on gun violence. It says, incidents of gun violence have gone up dramatically in King County over the past 2 years. Just as there is not one main reason for the uptick, there is not one solution, but several bills before the legislature, including 1630, 1705, 1759, and 5078, offer some positive steps toward reducing gun violence. How do you view the likelihood of passage of some or all of these bills in this short session?
I will take that question. I think the likelihood of us passing very many of those bills is very, very good. We took a bit of a pass last year on some of these gun violence prevention measures due to the overwhelming need to respond to COVID and racial justice issues. But 2020 broke records in King County for deaths by gun violence and injuries. And guess what? Yesterday we learned 2021 beat 2020. Action is needed now on reducing gun violence urgently in our communities. It is a public health crisis, and I believe as lawmakers, we must do everything we can to stop these preventable deaths. Gun violence is preventable. I repeat, gun violence is preventable. And I am so proud to be advocating for the whole suite of bills that you mentioned. In particular, my bill 1705 will ban homemade, untraceable ghost guns. These are parts that are easily bought online and assembled at home. They don't have serial numbers, and you don't need a background check to get one. We need to make sure we know who has these guns, and they are now the favorite of gun traffickers in our state and our country. I think this year could be the year that we get our ban on high-capacity magazines. This is a personal one for me. The shooting that killed my friend in Tucson, Arizona, the shooter had a gun with many, many, many rounds of ammunition. And it wasn't until he had to reload that he was stopped from shooting more people. This is a common sense measure that we should get done this year, and I'm ready to do it. Again, I'm advocating for $15 million to fund the Office of Firearm Prevention and Safety. We stood up this office in 2020. We have not put real money into it. And we know that these community-based organizations that go into trusted communities and help to prevent and reduce gun violence work. We've seen it done in other states and other cities, and we need to fully implement this program here. Please know this is a top priority of our caucus. I believe it's a top priority of House leadership. And I am looking forward to seeing what we can get done this year. And you have a real champion in the legislature and me and all three of us up here. So thank you for that question.
Great. And thank you for your response, Rep. Berry. So our next question is, what is your position on House Bill 1767 and its companion, 5666? Because buildings are the fastest growing sector of greenhouse gas emissions due to heating with fossil fuels. Efficient heat pumps are essential to meeting our climate goals. This bill is about giving customers the choice to switch and funding that choice, and utilities can only implement this plan if it is better for all of us.
Yeah, I'll take that. So this is a bill that basically allows City Light and other public utilities to offer incentives for folks to move away from natural gas. So I'm number 2 on the bill in the Senate. We are going to most likely move the House vehicle. I've worked with Representative Joe Fitzgibbon on that as chair of the committee in the House as well. I would say that there's a couple of issues to be very sensitive to, which is on a cold, rainy day in January, natural gas powers 2/3 of Seattle. And so the issue of reliability really does matter. And what that really means is that we need a level of coordination with the Utilities and Transportation Committee to ensure that we're planning for the appropriate wind down of our use of natural gas as we move to electrify. So it seems easy, but it's actually not. We have to be very sensitive to the issue of reliability. The other issue that is important in this, and again, I'm really committed to the bill, and we're doing what we can to get it through. But the other issue is equity, and let me tell you why. So, if, for example, the folks in the 36 said, "I'm going to take those City Light incentives, maybe $5,000 to convert your appliances to electric only," that's something that a lot of our constituents would sign up for and would be really excited about. But unfortunately, a low-income single mom in Renton who doesn't have that opportunity it may not be likely to take advantage of that. So there is an equity issue here, because what happens is that folks in Renton and otherwhere are obligated to recognize that pay for the cost of that natural gas infrastructure. It gets a smaller and smaller base. So there's real issues of equity and location and where people live on that issue. So we're supportive of the policy. I'm working very closely with the governor's office on this, as well as Representative Fitzgibbon. But there's a pretty serious complexity to it, and we just have to do it at a responsible pace. But I'm excited. I believe in the next number of years that we will systematically move away from the use of natural gas in our buildings.
Great. Thank you, Senator Carlyle. Our next question is, can we expect to see the $54 million line item for the Ballard Interbay Regional Transportation Corridor get funded this year?
Ooh, I'll take that one. I mean, Reuven also probably has something to add but we know that this corridor, the Ballard Interbay Transportation Corridor, called BERT, as some people call it, is the third most south-north transportation and freight corridor after I-5 and 99. We know it's critically important to our district, our region, and our state. And both the Magnolia and Ballard bridges are on their very last legs for life, and we must do something to partner with the state. Now, those are bridges the state owns and operates, but the city do. But as state partners, I believe we should be a part of that effort. And when we do take a look at how those bridges will be different, it's important, I think, to consider other ways for people to get across them on bike, pedestrian, rolling, transit, all of it. And I really see my role in the House Transportation Committee. I'm only one of 2 members from Seattle on the House Transportation Committee, and I'm proud of that. And I try to use that position to bring an urbanist perspective, knowing the priorities of our district and making sure that we're advocating not just for roads, but for transit and other climate investments. So I'm hopeful that we see some investment from the state in these bridges. I know Reuven, I kind of want to tee it up for him because he's got a really exciting project that he's working on as well. So Reuven, why don't you tell everyone about that?
Sure. Thanks, Liz. So Liz is absolutely right that there's not a lot of members of Transportation Committee from Seattle. So it is important to have her voice. I really appreciate that. This is important, and we know we have to do it, but we also know the Magnolia Bridge. We know the entire ecosystem as Sound Transit gets built out and as we enhance Metro. So it's obviously about a deeply integrated approach, and the issue of density and smart growth comes into play. That same dynamic is actually important, not just in terms of because the industrial base of Ballard and keeping our industrial base flowing, but also the issue of 99. This last weekend, Noel and I had an opportunity. Liz was unavailable to join us, but we had a very large contingent of folks. We had city council members, as well as State Senator Marco Lias, the chair of the Transportation Committee, and the deputy mayor, Harrell joined, Monisha Harrell joined. And we really looked at North Aurora 99 as an important part of investment from equity point of view, as well as sort of the next generation of density and what could possibly happen. The fact that it's this major arterial right through the heart of the city isn't the only way it has to be. We could really embrace an urbanist vision of high density, as well as multimodal and slowing down traffic and having cafes and access to parks, and the pedestrians can get to the school. So I believe that the Ballard regional area, as well as 99, is incredibly important. We're so much better as a city than what our system looks like. So I'm really committed to both. And then the end point of this is we are extremely committed to a comprehensive transportation package this year in the 2022 legislative session. I expect some widespread agreement that we have a chance at that. And we're obviously working out the details to see what we can get in terms of investments for our community.
Great. Thank you both for your responses. Our next question is a live question from Colin. He asks, what's being done to fund community-oriented behavioral health centers?
Thanks for that, Colin. So as I think about the whole universe of need around the behavioral health system, I will tell you that one of the biggest crises facing us right now is the shortage in the workforce in behavioral health, which is, if you're going to have a community behavioral health center, obviously having workers there would be pretty critical. We had a pretty massive shortage in the behavioral health workforce prior to COVID, and we made some really great progress establishing a new sort of teaching school for behavioral health at UW, I think a couple of years ago. And we have seen just, incredible growth in need over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've also seen some, changes that we'd long wanted that finally happened. Access to telehealth, which was always something requested, particularly from our rural legislators, is something that became very mainstream during the pandemic and is not going away, but only further heightened demand for behavioral health services with that workforce not being ready to be there. Much of the conversation that you will see around behavioral health in the 2022 legislative session, you'll see a lot of it out of not only the healthcare committee, but our higher education committee, and really making the investments into the slots for those programs to train up more of our therapists, more of our psychologists and psychiatrists. You will also see a focus on behavioral health in our K-12 schools in particular. We have a great piece of legislation from Representative Alicia Rule from Blaine, which does a modification to the prototypical school model to increase the allocation of counselors and other behavioral health staff in our K-12 schools. I probably don't have to tell anybody listening to this call about the deep challenges our young people have faced this last couple of years, not just in the educational setting in terms of like learning loss, but the physical separation from their peers for such a sustained period of time has left young people feeling lonely. We've seen increases in suicidal ideation, massive uptick in depression and other behavioral health diagnoses. So if we are going to tackle this problem, there's a whole host of things that we need to do in terms of increasing providers, but we're going to have to really invest in developing that workforce to catch up. So I think that is probably the best thing I can tell you, Colin, about how to be responsive to community behavioral health. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Rep. Frame. This is a reminder that you're watching a live virtual town hall with the 36th Legislative District, and you can submit questions in the comment section. Our next question is, first, it's a thank you to Senator Carlyle for working to eliminate the death penalty in Washington state over the past many years. And the question is this the year to get it over the finish line?
Thanks so much for that. I've been proud to work on that for 13 years. We know that the state Supreme Court has ruled that it is unconstitutional as it is designed currently. The executive branch in Governor Inslee has put a moratorium and said that he will not take action. It's only the legislature, the people's representatives, who have not taken a stand on the death penalty in 50 years. And I believe that it's below us as a civilized society, and it's been a top priority of mine forever. I am sad to say that it's unquestionably clear to me that it will not pass this year. The Speaker of the House, Speaker Jenkins, who is an opponent of death penalty, just simply doesn't believe it's important relative to the courts. She believes the court has ruled, and so it's unlikely to happen. And so there's no need for the legislature to take that action. So that's a fundamental disagreement that I have with her. She has been emphatic about that and thinking that it's not worth the legislature's time to pass, and not worth the floor time in the House and the controversy, and not worth taking a stand on. I think that's unfortunate. I understand that as a lawyer, she feels strongly that it's unlikely to be implemented. But if the Republicans, but if the other party takes over one of the chambers, I think it's fair to say that you will see language to clarify the court ruling that would still move forward to make it implemented in Washington state. So it does matter. I think it's a deep failure of the people's representatives after so many years to refuse to take a stand on this important issue. It's an issue of moral integrity. It's an issue of race and equity and justice. And I think it's a sad reflection on us. And I'm sorry to say that it will not pass this year, but maybe next year my successors and others will have the opportunity to move forward on that. So thank you so much for that.
Great. Thank you for your response. Our next question is, autistic children and those on the spectrum face an uncertain future in adulthood. Do we stop caring once they're 21? Why is no funding provided for autistic adults or adults on the spectrum?
I would be happy to take that question. We have so much work to do to support our neighbors with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And I will just say, so from a per capita funding standpoint, we're almost dead last in the country for the investments that we make in our neighbors with developmental and intellectual disabilities. So I would just say, first and foremost, we have a long, long way to go. I will say I am encouraged by some of the legislation I'm seeing this year. We absolutely do have services for autistic children and adults. We just simply don't fund them at the proper level to meet the need in our community. But two pieces of legislation that I'm excited about. One is we currently have a prohibition on our neighbors getting concurrent services, both work first services as well as community supports. And in fact, what that does for our neighbors is that folks that have a hard time securing work, we call it supported employment, are prevented from even beginning to access services until they've gone through that process of seeking employment and trying to find an employer that can work with them. And for those that are successful in that environment, supported employment is wonderful. We have one of the best programs in the nation, but it doesn't work for everyone, and we shouldn't prevent those who need those inclusion services and community from getting it when they need it. So one of the bills I'm excited about is lifting that prohibition. That's House Bill 1980, so that folks can access both employment and inclusive community services at the same time. The other effort that's underway is really making sure that we are planning with our young people with developmental disabilities while they're still in high school, a plan for adulthood, thinking through the services, thinking through a job, thinking through housing. Many of our neighbors with intellectual and developmental disabilities absolutely can live an independent life with the right supports and planning. And so we're making we've got legislation moving to really invest and beef up that program for that planning for folks with autism as well as other developmental and intellectual disabilities. So lots of work to do, but really, really, really appreciate the question.
Great. Thank you, Reuven Frame. Our next question is, will you support House Bill 1721, which will provide a one-time 3% increase for PERS Plan 1 members?
I'll take this one. The answer is yes. Just for everyone out there listening, that's a COLA increase for retirees, public employee retirees, and also teachers. And actually, I met with a bunch of them today as part of our constituent meetings, and I am not going to tell a bunch of retired teachers that we are not going to make sure they have enough money to retire. As the daughter of a former public school special ed teacher and having aunties who were public school teachers, I am not going to say that to them. So yes, of course. And I think this is the opportunity now as we're seeing our state budget coffers back up where they should be. This is a time, people like our retirees were taking sacrifices and taking cuts and not having COLAs. And now is a time to double down on that, make sure that we're fulfilling our promises to them so they can still continue to retire with dignity and respect. So you can count on me. I'm not saying no to that. And thank you for your advocacy. It's so great. It must be one of you who was meeting with me today. So now you've got it on the record in front of everybody here tonight.
Thank you, Rep. Berry. So our next question is, how can Seattle and other cities who support House Bill 1782 and Senate Bill 5670, the modest middle housing proposals, convince opponents that this is a very common sense tool in our toolkit? It won't solve all the problems, but it has long been off the table as a solution.
I'll go ahead and tackle that. Thanks for the question. And if the question is how can we convince others, I think the most simple way to say it is there is literally no singular silver bullet solution to our housing shortage and the crisis that we are facing with our homelessness and our neighbors living outside. As the chair of the House Finance Committee, this is my 7th session on the Finance Committee. The myriad of housing bills that come through the Finance Committee, and that's only one of the committees that receives this policy, one of the fiscal committees, and it goes through policy committees as well. We have to tackle this from so many angles. And I agree that 1782 is just common sense. I mean, we've got places in the city that are extraordinarily dense, but we have places in the city like north of 85th, where I live in Greenwood, which were incorporated into the city later, did not have the same planning, and have massive lots with tiny single family homes sitting on them, and are absolutely ripe for infill housing like ADUs, like duplexes, like fourplexes, so that more of our neighbors that would like, our potential neighbors that would love to live in the amazing, gorgeous 36th district, but it's completely out of reach financially, might have a shot of joining our neighborhoods. We've got legislation in our committee right now to incentivize the building of accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units. Again, 2 different examples of infill housing. And I mean, I've looked at doing it in my property. It's extraordinarily expensive, and anything that we can do to help incentivize folks by, for instance, saying, you know, a property tax exemption in exchange for having housing available that's affordable for somebody that, you know, maybe is below 60% area median income, but you can't do rent more than 30 to 40% of their total household income. That's like the creative solutions that we could do there. But we can't do any of that if we don't change the zoning to allow beyond development beyond single family homes. So I think it's common sense. I think we have to tackle every part of the spectrum. And House Bill 1782 represents a key part of that menu of options that are going to help us resolve this housing crunch. So I really appreciate the question.
Great. Thank you so much. Our next question is a live question for Senator Carlyle. They say, hi, Senator Carlyle. Speaking of transportation, with Seattle being the largest school district in our state with subcontracted bus drivers, how are you feeling about the state using some of the extra school district money to fund health insurance in the SEB plan for our subcontracted school bus drivers? Senate Bill 5326, Senator Robinson's bill, would allow this to be a reality.
Thanks so much. I voted for the bill in Ways and Means, and I think there's the possibility that this can make it over the line, but it is a complex situation because, of course, we have a very important funding formula for our transportation and school bus drivers. I mean, what a tough job relative to this economy and the systems and COVID. And so really been a difficult challenge. We want to support them. We do have a subcontracting model, exactly right, with the one company that has a monopoly in this space. So I think we are open as a state to using some resources from the state to supplement the agreement, but we have to figure out how to do that equitably because we've got a whole bunch. We got 1 million kids statewide, and we've got a lot of districts, and Seattle's really feeling the pinch on this. So I know families are incredibly frustrated when the bus comes late and how difficult it is. So we're really working on this. We're keeping the bill moving to continue to work on it and see what kind of agreement we might be able to come up with.
Great, thank you. So our next question is for Rep. Berry. Thank you, Rep. Berry, for bringing up PFAS. I keep seeing articles about PFAS in our environment and building up in our bodies. How worried should I be? Is there some way to avoid them?
Oh, such a good question. I didn't know anything about PFAS chemicals until I read a story in the Seattle Times this summer. There was a study done of Puget Sound area mothers, and they found that PFAS was found in their breast milk, and they were passing it on to their babies. And as a mom of 2 young kids who breastfed my 2 babies, I was terrified when I read this, and I contacted legislative staff and said, what can we do to fix this? And what I learned is that the PFAS chemicals are toxic and pervasive, and they're found in everyday products that we all wear, like in Gore-Tex and clothing and cosmetics. Look at Frame. She's like, Noel is like, I'm not wearing makeup ever again. Firefighting foam. And there was a new study actually just released last week that showed that PFAS is linked to numerous health concerns like liver and heart damage, immune disorders, and cancer. We are a leader. Washington State is a leader. We passed a bill, the Safer Products Act in 2019, that banned toxic chemicals like PFAS. But I learned that there is more we could do. So I dropped a bill this year that will build on the law to improve the process overall, create efficiencies, and speed up action on the state's ability to regulate PFAS chemicals. Because without this legislative fix, it will take up until 2030 to see these harmful products banned. And I thought that was too long to wait. So that bill is currently in the House Appropriations Committee. I'm feeling good about getting it off the House floor and over to Reuven so he can shepherd it through the Senate and we can get that law passed. But thank you for that question. I am learning so much about it and am excited to lead the charge on that this year.
Thank you so much, Rep. Berry. So that is actually all the time we have for questions this evening. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question. I'm now going to turn it back over to the legislators for closing remarks. Rep. Berry, would you like to begin?
I want to thank everyone so much for joining us tonight on a busy, Tuesday night to tune in. It is such an honor and a pleasure to represent you in Olympia. Thank you so much. Please keep in touch with us. Email us, call us. Let us know if there's something particular on your mind. If you want to have a meeting on an issue, set that up. And please keep up the good fight. We'll keep fighting for you in Olympia. We've only got a few more weeks left of session. And I'm telling you, it is like drinking, from a fire hose. It is a lot of work, but I've got two great partners in the legislature here to help me get through it. And thank you again and have a great night.
Great. Thanks so much. I echo the sentiment. Thank you all so much for joining us. We love doing these events and having a chance to engage with constituents. I think just the last thing I want to share is just one bill I've been working on this year. And I want to express my thanks. Over 6 years, this district has supported me in my passion to support our young people with behavioral health issues, and particularly youth that make mistakes, end up in our juvenile criminal justice system and work to move on with their lives. I'm so excited about a bill that's moving forward that I'm sponsoring, House Bill 2034, regarding juvenile records. And when our young people make mistakes and they do everything right and they're allowed to seal their records, they should have confidence that they can put their past behind them and move on. Unfortunately, what is happening is state agencies and other entities, including law enforcement agencies, are leaking the sealed records of those young people, undermining their confidence in their ability to move on and literally ruining their lives. The bill that I have put forward provides a private right of action for those young people as adults to sue the agencies and entities that leak these sealed records, so that there is accountability and enforcement of the laws that we have passed. And I'm excited to see that move forward this year. And I'm so grateful that this district continues to support that work. So thank you. And I will turn it over to Senator Carlyle.
Thank you so much. And I just appreciate the opportunity, like we all do, to spend a little time together. We really do take it seriously when you reach out to us, when you send an email, when you make a call and engage and let us know what's important. We really take it seriously. I think everyone knows that we have the highest registration rate in the state, and we have the highest voter turnout in the state. And that is a symbolic representation of the deep civic engagement of our district. And what it allows us to do as your voices in Olympia, it's to work on really tough and important systems issues. So thank you so much. It's a great honor to be your partner in service. We appreciate it. I'm deeply honored to have been your partner as well. I've got another year to go ultimately, but I just want to take this moment to thank everyone for that opportunity to be your partner as we work on the really important issues facing our state. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight.
That is all the time we have this evening. Thank you so much for attending and for submitting questions for your lawmakers. If we did not get to your question, you can directly contact Senator Carlyle, Rep. Frame, and Rep. Berry's offices with your comments. Their contact information will be on the screen shortly. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great evening.